All right, so it is 6:02 p.m. I want to call this special meeting of the Board of Finance to order. For the record, today is Tuesday, June 4th, 2024. We have all 6 Board of Finance members participating. In person, I have Ms. Inacito, Ms. Pesky, Ms. Traub, Mr. Anderson, Mr. Wright, and participating via Zoom, I have Mr. Bayes. This is, I'll remind everyone, a special meeting, and accordingly, there is no public comment in the beginning. So we're going to jump right into, well, before we begin, could we stand and pledge the flag? Okay. So item number 1 is a discussion of the budgets, and I guess this is where I get to talk a little bit about the things that I heard over the last 4 to 6 weeks, and how I've incorporated those comments or recommendations in the budget deliberations. Before I begin with that discussion, I do want to first take a moment to acknowledge and express my appreciation to Erica Johnson, our budget manager, who has done an amazing job. Anytime I said, could I have a number, she'd bring up 6 numbers. So Alice Prue has been also in the background giving guidance, giving advice, and helping to do some of the finite details. And I don't think that this board has met her yet, but Olivia DeRosa is our deputy comptroller. She also, as she's working on things like fund balance and internal service fund and all of those other accounts relative to the audit, she's been instrumental in also giving us some help. With all of that said, I'll just go over the overarching with the process. So we started with a budget subcommittee. In that budget subcommittee, as you heard me say last week, all various department heads, the big departments, where there's, a $10 million budget, an $8 million budget, a $13 million budget. They met with the budget subcommittee, and that subcommittee went through every line item. They really did dig in. And the result of that budget subcommittee deliberation was to advance a recommendation that the budgets go to the city council with a high, and they highly recommended that consideration be given, that there be no mill rate increase. This is a tough year. We have a revaluation happening on 10/1/2024 next year that hopefully the adjusted grand list will be able to loosen up some of the reins we have on a almost 48 mill rate. So that recommendation came out of the subcommittee, and that vote was 4-2, 4 in favor of that recommendation. Also, what came out of the subcommittee was a strong recommendation, a goal that in deliberating how we come to the conclusion with regard to the mill rate, that we first fund the amounts necessary to cover the increase of the debt service. This is an expense that the voters all voted on. There's an expectation that those expenses, well, obviously we have to cover them because they are borrowed money, but there's an expectation for those funds. As you heard in the meeting last week, the increase, just the increase, not total debt service, the increase in fiscal year 25 is $2,264,271. I rounded it to 2.3. So those were, that was the information I took from the budget subcommittee. As we made our way through the budget hearings, we also listened to comments with regard to equity and reasonableness and how to move the city forward. So what I am presenting to you today are some options, taking first into consideration the strong recommendation that came out of the budget subcommittee, but also showing you what that impact is. So I'm going to blow through the first few slides in this presentation because these are familiar. These are the slides that you all saw last week. I want to say the names have been changed to protect the innocent. Okay. So here we are. This is your budget presentation for the Board of Finance as of today's date. This does have some changes, minor changes to the sheets from last week, but again, minor changes, corrections of some typos and stuff like that. Slide number 2. This, as you know, is the City Department expense review at this point, which is level 4 or 5. We are at $71,407,269. I do stress that through the work of the budget subcommittee and the city council, there was slightly over $3,850,000 in cuts that have already been made. Slide 3. This is the Board of Education's request. This is their operating budget, their capital budget, and the final as it stands right now at $84,172,973. Broken into 2 parts because the Board of Education's budgets are always voted on separately, operating and capital. Keeping in mind that the operating budget is actually the budget that dictates the minimum budget requirement, or MBR, a phrase we're all very familiar with, and the capital budget is not included in the MBR. Page 4, nothing new here. These are the numbers that reflect the grand list growth. As you saw, real estate and personal property grew, motor vehicles shrank. Those are the numbers that we used in calculating the mill rate. General fund revenue, again, nothing new. These are the same numbers that we discussed on the 28th. Even though I've pushed the limit, I think, on can we look at that extra $50,000 here or there? The determination was nothing in any of these projections really would swing the mill rate or deliberations in any way. So we're keeping with the revenue as it was presented on the 28th. Page 6. So this page is different. When we presented this on the 28th, we talked about the internal service fund, the fund balance, and the bond ban premium and interest transfer. These that's the premium that's realized when the bonds and the bond anticipation notes are sold. You'll note that I removed the internal service fund projection or suggestion from this deliberation. I'm making a recommendation that we hold off making any withdrawals from the internal service fund until the city and the Board of Ed have had an opportunity to develop governance documents and a committee structure so that there's sufficient input and confidence on how best to use those funds. However, in the fund balance, what we realized, I'm sorry, we're still on 6. You got it? Yeah. fund balance. Last year, we took $1.9 million out of the fund balance to offset last year's increase. This year, what we found is we're again well-funded in fund balance for a lot of reasons. This board is very particular about spending monies in other line items for things that haven't been budgeted. As a rule, we don't do it. Maybe a little to the chagrin of some of the department heads, we don't say go and buy office furniture out of a salary line item. We stick to what was adopted. And as a result, we usually end the year with surplus funds. This year, the anomaly was we were budgeting very conservatively for interest income. We budgeted fiscal year 24 at $1,750,000. And I didn't bring that sheet down with me, but we are actually, it's experiencing over $3 million of interest income. So based on, the positive fund balance performance, I am recommending that there is wiggle room above that policy that this board adopted to be able to transfer and return back to the taxpayers in the form of a credit against the expenses, $3.9 million. The bond ban premium speaks for itself. Those are the actual sales net of the legal fees and advice and counsel fees at the time the bonds were sold. Any questions on that slide before I go?
If you wouldn't mind, for the fund balance, we aim for the 7 to 10.
Yes.
Could you remind us where we landed after transferring in last year and where this 3.9 would put us for this year? Are we the high end or low end of that?
High end.
High end.
Yes. So as of 6/30/2023, we were at 15,444,000 against, this is 10% of the operating budget, and the operating budget for that fiscal year was 146. So we were a little above that. And with the surpluses and expenses, projected year-end expenses, and that increase in interest, we're closer to the, when we pull the 3.9 out, we should be closer to the 10%, maybe 9%.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions on this page? All right, so mill rate impact. Again, this page did not change from last week's discussion based on the spending plans that were presented and the revenues at the current mill rate, the 47.9636. We would be looking at a 3.49 mill increase if we don't dig in a little bit deeper on these spending plans. Actually, I said there's no change on this page. If you were to compare the 5/28/2024 version to this version, you would see in the 5/28 version, we did anticipate potentially being able to use $2 million in the internal service fund. We did remove that from this page. We're not even entertaining that conversation. At page 8, these were the budget drivers, I guess, or overarching goals and what we were listening to. Again, hearing first and foremost, let's make sure we're covering the $2.2 million, almost $2.3 million, and the increase in debt service. I did on the 28th have to consider the impact of the net budgeting for insurance funds. I did have a meeting, and we are working with the Board of Education leadership team to establish governance documents. And as a show of good faith, we're again taking off the table any conversation with regard to the internal service fund transfers. However, these budgets, as they are presented, are gross to gross. So premium cost shares are reflected as gross revenue to the general fund, and the expenses are gross expenses on the spending plans. I think, Ms. Pesky, you did ask that that we reach out to the auditors and confirm that this was proper budgeting practices, which I did. And we were assured this is proper budgeting practice. It's not the only way to budget for that, but it is certainly being done correctly. And then the ARPA, which last presentation, I think I had it as a bullet item under the Board of Education, but Ms. Pesky, you said that you wanted this to be something that we consider with regard to both the board and the city. So it is a separate bullet item. Page 9 is just an explanation again about that section 10-262K, where the Board of Education can seek from the State Department of Education authority to claim another 2% in addition to the Alliance District funds, another 2% of the ECS funds to be paid directly to the Board of Education. So the result of this is a reduction of the general fund revenues that are available to cover any increases in the budget.
I have a quick question on that. Because this is not part of the Alliance District, are there the same restrictions on this, or it's just regular?
They're
Same
essentially the same restrictions,
So
yeah.
if they request it, it goes into the Alliance restricted?
It doesn't go into the Alliance. It is budgeted separately. But the board does have to submit to the State Department of Education a proposed spending plan.
Okay.
That needs to be approved. Obviously, the goals are the same: raise test scores, increase graduation rate, increase attendance, all of those markers that Alliance District has.
Okay.
Same thing with this. Once the test scores or all of those markers have been achieved and they can be exited from or graduated from the Alliance District designation, this statute would also peel away. Page 10, again, this is a document, a page that you saw in on the 28th. I did make a correction when we were double checking our math. I had included the $478,666 amount in both the Alliance District line and on the separate line 10-262. So I've made those corrections, and this now reflects accurately what funding, not grant funding, not IDEA, not Perkins, not any of those other funds, but just ECS related funding is reflected on this page. Education budgets through the fiscal year 25 request. I believe there was a comment made during the public portion about the increases over the 6-year period of time, 7-year with this request. I did want to clarify that while the operating budget is one piece of the puzzle, because we have the ECS portion of the ECS funding that goes into the Alliance District controlled spending, along with the $478,666, that in fact, from 2018 to 2025, the increase in funding, when you factor in those other vehicles, is almost 26% increase. This, I think you heard me refer to as the Mark Bushka page, which was blank at the time. So the Board of Education projection, I've left this as an assumption that there will be no funds left in the fiscal year 24 budget. I know that the BOE is working on a review of line items to cover the final installment of the health insurance transfer. So at this point, we had to make some decisions. So I'm basing tonight's presentation and recommendations on the assumption that there will be nothing left over, no surplus of fiscal year 24 expenditures. You heard me already mention the city projection, which is largely based off of I should say, solely based off the increase of the interest income. The additional 2.3 million on top of the 15,400,000 we had as of July 30th. And this is where, actually this page 13, you saw this last week. This is based on the budgets presented and the revenues anticipated, what we needed to do in order to achieve any of the proposed mill rate impact. If we were looking to have no increase in the mill rate, we would be looking for a combined $6,560,933 in budget cuts. If it's a half mil increase, that drops to $5,600,000 in cuts. And if there's a 1 mil increase, $4,670,000. I did not spend a lot of time, anytime, there's nothing in the pages here, to go over that 2 mil increase, because based on what the subcommittee was communicating, it felt that that was unilaterally off the table. So here's where you find your new pages. With a proposal for cuts that will provide the funds necessary to cover debt service first, 2.3 million. And it's 3 proposals: the mill rate at 0, the mill rate at 0.5, and a 1 mil increase. So you'll see here what the proposal would be, and I should start from the bottom of the page first. Obviously, we need to find or secure the $2.3 million for debt service. So on the city side, to get to that 2.3 million, we had to take the 71,407,269 that has been presented to the Board of Finance, and we would have to reduce that expense, those expenses, by $1,110,658 to get to a appropriation that would cover the debt service. In order to do that, the impact to the Board of Education would be to zero out their capital request and reduce their operating request, the sum that they requested, which would result in level funding of $78,722,698. That's level funded to the fiscal year 24 operating budget. If we were to entertain the thought of a half mil increase, again, the goal was to fund first the $2.3 million in debt service. So for the city's portion of 71,407,269, we would be looking at a $1,014,176 decrease, resulting in $70,393,093, which would provide us sufficient funds to cover the debt service. The impact of the Board of Education would be, again, to zero out their capital. And when I say zero out their capital, I should add the proviso that we will work with the Board of Education and our community impact grants through ARPA to see if any of those expenses can be transferred or covered through the ARPA program. So again, we would look at a zero on the capital. We would be looking at a reduction of $3,055,482 on their operating, which would result in an increase over fiscal year 24 of $846,559, which is slightly over maybe 1.25%. If the board were to entertain the thought of a 1 mil increase, again, I'm I'm looking at what what the city needs to do is cover the debt service of 2.3 million. If we use a 1,003,403 for a reduction off of the 71,407, it would result in $2,635,761 covering debt service, and the impact of the Board of Education, again, zeroing out their capital, reducing their operating by $2,121,135. This would result in an increase to the Board of Education of $1,779,581. Yeah, questions on this page?
Sorry, I
Yeah.
wasn't sure if we were going to wait till the end. So looking at these proposals, with all these options, looking at zero, half, or a full mill, it looks like there's no substantial change on the city reductions. So we're looking at making at least $1 million cut to the city budget,
We are.
no matter what is chosen. So the cities definitely do that. And talking about the Board of Ed's capital, you mentioned a few minutes ago, it's too soon to know where their current fiscal year will end as far as a surplus or deficit. So this zeroing it out now is too soon to say, because don't we usually take any surpluses they have and allocate that directly to capital? So they may still have some projects funded. We just
Correct.
don't know what their year end is yet, right?
Correct. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, and that's the process where once they close their year end out, they know what their surpluses are. They come back to the Board of Finance, and up to 2% of their operating budget can be transferred into a capital reserve.
I don't think we've ever denied that request, right?
Never, not, at least not in the 11 years or 6 years while I was on the council. It's never been denied.
Thank you.
And I will add that the reason I did in each one of these only look at the $1 million for the city is because, again, reflecting on everything that I was hearing, the priority is fund the debt service first and then look at the equitable distribution after that. So practically speaking, this is the page I think that had Erica and me dizzy. If the Board of if the Board of Finance is inclined to stick to the recommendation from the Budget Subcommittee and hold this mill rate at the 47.9636, which I would actually suggest that it either be rounded up to 479.97, only because our tax collector had a nightmare when she saw 4 decimal places.
A little too.
Yeah. She needed to read it a few times before she could say something to me. So the result would be that the approval would be for a city budget in the amount of $70,296,611, a Board of Education operating appropriation of $78,722,698. The total expenses would be the $149,309,019,309. When you apply the grants, the motor vehicle, which motor vehicles, as you saw in the grand list information, was actually down quite a bit. So there's a reduction in the revenue when we're experiencing that cap at 32.46. And again, using a fund balance appropriation, not touching internal service fund, you'll see that those two expenses and revenue line items would come in at the $149,019,309. The next page shows the impact at the 1/2 mil increase. And it speaks for itself, 70,393,093 for the city, 79,564,531 for the Board of Education's operating budget. The revenue changes only in so much as The personal property and real estate would now be taxed at 48.46 mils. And you see a modest uptick from 9662 to 91,600. And the total budget approval and the revenue would be $149,957,624. And then the third one is the 1 mil increase, 70,403,866 to the city, 80,498,878 to the Board of Education. And likewise, the personal property real estate, now taxed at 48.96 mils, brings in $92,546,108. So that is my presentation. Based on what we heard, and using those revenue streams that we discussed earlier, you know, the increase in the Alliance District funding this year is over $3 million, coupled with the $478,666. I think that amount of money is burned into my brain. In the page, back on page 14, you'll see where when you looked at the 0 mil, the half mil, or the mil increase, when you add in that 3,676,29, you could see the total increase in educational spending that results from those additional externally controlled expenses. So if we level fund at 0 with the 3.6 million, there's a $3.6 million increase. At a half mil, it goes to 4.5 million, and at a full mil, it would be 5,456,000. So the floor is open for discussion.
Start, Mayor. First of all, I'd like to thank the mayor and the subcommittee and all the hard work and the various department heads and city boards that have worked hard and diligently to have a responsible budget. I would certainly like to entertain a 0 mil increase. I, as a former educator, hate to think that the Board of Ed is going to put the burden on teachers or staff. I think the debt service is something that was well known that this was going to be there. I think the increase in salaries was 6 months or so ago. I think a responsible superintendent's budget would have reflected that, and I think they would have made an effort to present something that we could work with.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. Actually, I don't know, is that a motion to entertain the discussion for a 0?
Yes.
Okay, so I have a motion. Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second.
So motion made by Jim Wright, seconded by Wendy Traub, to adopt a budget that would result in a 0 increase in the mill rate. Floor is open for discussion.
Mayor, in looking at this sheet that was the first page that was included online in the package, where it goes through the level 1, 2, and 3 budget cuts. I just want, because it's so tiny, but I want people to be aware that on the city side, we did come up with almost $3.8 million worth of cuts to get us to where the number is currently. So a lot of subcommittee, a lot of department head conversations about where they could come up with those efficiencies did reduce that already 3.8 million. So I don't, I want to be aware that we've already
Done quite a bit of work.
really redone quite a bit on that. This is unfortunate. Just having gotten on the board, it's unfortunate that the Alliance District money for the Board of Education, um, and I commented last week on it, that they'll be up almost to 10 million. And it's unfortunate that we're in this situation, because the reality is if that money was in our ECS, there would be no strings attached to it. And then the Board of Ed could use it for whatever they see fit. By us being tied to this Alliance District for as many years as we're going to be, it does put the onus on the Board of Ed to unfortunately continue to provide more, as we were seeing in their professional service development, but things like that, and hire additional staff. And I think that's unfortunately a problem the Board of Ed is having, is they don't have the discretion to use all this additional money for the things that they see that this district needs to go forward. Instead, the onus on Alliance District, it has to be used for new things. So understand, next year, we're into the tune of almost $10 million of new things that have been added to our budget over the past so many years that we couldn't, again, supposedly you cannot supplant, you have to supplement. And that will revert back to the city at some point and be the taxpayer's charge to cover that at some point. So I will say, the unfortunate thing, Mr. Anderson had asked, the unfortunate thing, their budget really isn't gross to gross because none of the Alliance District expenditures are included in the 78 or so million dollars. The reality is it is over, it's almost 90. So that will revert back. And so that I'm sad. I'm sad that they're going to enjoy this increase of over $3 million, but hopefully they can work within their system to find ways to utilize that money for things they actually do need and not have to keep continuing to hire, or buy professional development that they may or may not need. I'm not a professional. It's just unfortunate because they are receiving so much more money, but there's so many strings attached to it. It would be really great if we weren't an Alliance District, then that money could be used for however they see fit. The reason I support the 0% increase, obviously being on the subcommittee, I had spoken before. And this ties back to the Board of Ed too. I saw something on the State Department of Ed that said that 67% of our children are qualified for free and reduced lunch. And that's a reality. That means 67% of the families in this town are having some type of financial difficulty. It is incumbent upon the Board of Finance to not only look at the expense side of things, but also the revenue side of things. And the majority of that revenue side of thing is the taxpayers' dollars. So I look at it as that tax increase is most definitely going to affect those families because there's not a landlord out there who's just going to absorb all that. They're in their job to make money. They rent out these places as a revenue source for them. And I will tell you, they're not going to take on that additional $500 or $600 or $700. They're going to pass it down to their tenants. So I'm concerned about this tax increase affecting the families on that end, as well as I've spoken in the past, the families that are on fixed incomes or the families that are on Social Security and Medicare and do not have any other option for additional revenue. So I looked at this seriously. I think the Budget Committee looked at it seriously, and I appreciate, Erica, I appreciate all the work that your department has done as well as far as getting us numbers. And I just think next year is going to be the year that we're really going to have a financial issue. So that's why I support it this time, because I think next year there is going to be a difference. And I hope that the reval will help us in some way at that point.
Other questions or comments on this motion? Mayor? Yes, please.
I don't quite understand how we can give raises to every single city and Board of Ed employee and not raise the mill rate. And every single other utility expense is going to go up. And even if we don't do any of the projects, because that's what's going to happen, because we have to pay people. We have to pay their benefits, which are also going up. So I don't support a zero increase. I would support a 1 mil increase, but I could be persuaded to go with a half mil. If I could persuade my other board members to think about that.
Thank you, Ms. Pesky.
I would agree with you, Ms. Pesky, and I'm thinking in Mr. Bushka's voice. You know, as much as we want to keep the mill at 0 every year, or negative would be great, this may not be the year to do it. And it's hard to picture level funding the Board of Ed. And everyone, you know, we agreed to some of these contracts. Next year is going to be very different with the reval. So I'm very much looking forward to seeing what that brings us. But a modest increase, maybe not a full mill, but and not just for rounding, to get some of those decimal places out. But we should do what we can, even if we can't do everything we want.
All right, so this is a motion with a second for a 0 mil increase. Any other questions or comments? I haven't been paying attention. Is there, Chris Bayes is on the call. I don't know if you wanted to weigh in or you're ready to vote on this.
Yeah, Mayor, can you hear me?
We can, yes.
You know, it's always stuck between a rock and a hard place, right? When it comes to these decisions. But I do think, especially with the debt service coming on the books, not only once, but twice that the taxpayers vote, you know, for this bonding and allowing this debt service to come on. Now, while I'm never a proponent to be raising the mill rate, I think that taxpayers understand this obligation, and you know, that something like a modest 0.5 increase until we get to the revaluation next year is not unreasonable right now. I get the feeling of you know, in the hard financial pinch sometimes that increase has on families, et cetera. But I think 0.5 is modest enough. And again, the taxpayers have to understand that they voted for this. You know, we can't make this debt service go away, and we can't take cuts to things like public safety, you know, in lieu of that. So, you know, would I love to see a 0 mil increase? Of course. But can I see a 0.5 happening? And then seeing where we end up next year, especially considering the amount we're taking at this time from fund balance. You know, even if there's a little more available there to hopefully offset this and some of the deep cuts that come with any of these decisions. You know, I think the taxpayers agreed to it. They showed us that, you know, they wanted to take on this debt, and here we are. So that's my input.
Thank you, Mr. Bayes. Any other questions or comments on the motion for a 0 mill rate increase?
Mayor, I just add to it, we might be in a different situation if we had the use of the internal service fund monies being transferred, but because we've chosen not to, we are in the situation we are. Look, I'm of the thought that government never spends less than the year before. And I'm talking about local, I'm talking about state, I'm talking about federal government. But I know for a fact that families all over Torrington have had to cut their budgets since COVID and deal with a lot less than they used to. People losing their jobs, losing an entire income, sometimes losing 2 incomes. And the reality for me is, for me, the message should be that government shouldn't keep spending more every year. How do we hold that line? We hold the line, but then we never go back. Nobody ever spends less than the year before. We just decrease our increase. We never spend less. And people aren't having that same fortunate advantage. They're still troubling. They're still trying to find jobs. They're still not making as much as they used to. And so that for me is why I propose that. That's all.
Yeah, and Mayor, if I can, you know, I understand Wendy's point, but at the end of the day, number one, unless we get a substantial increase in revenue from the grand list review, or you know, an economy shifts and inflation goes down, things are going to cost more and more every year. So the simple fact of I am also not a fan of spending. I think my record speaks for itself on this board. But, you know, at the end of the day, every single year, things cost more. It costs more to pay and insure an employee today than it did 5 years ago. And that's the unfortunate reality of where we are. So it's a point well taken. And like I said, you know, firsthand see the family struggling to stay afloat right now. But, you know, unfortunately, it's not going to go backwards. Like I said, unless significant revenue jumps for some reason, you know, whether it's from some type of new legislation or some type of different factor. Other than that, that's just the way it happens.
Okay.
So if I may, I've been sitting here, I'm quiet, listening to everybody. And it's a very tough decision for us to make. I think that, you know, we do have to listen to our taxpayers. We do have to understand that we've got another year coming up next year. That's going to be another interesting time for us, for the city. But I do honestly feel that raising the mill rate at this point right now is not the right time. I'm on the side of a 0 mill rate increase. Is that the all-inclusive answer? I don't think there is, but that's where my head is right now.
Forgive me if I'm phrasing this wrong, but I believe a point of order will allow me to ask a question.
Yeah.
Um,
You're still in.
If I understand, we have a motion on the floor to set the mill at a 0%. Isn't that the fourth item on the agenda?
So it
Out of
is,
order?
yeah. Well, yeah, I actually need to know where the board is because the first motions are to adapt the education operating budget, education capital budget, and the city's budget. So depending on, are we at 0, are we at 0.5, or are we at 1 mil?
Would we-
Would change the,
Are we still, would it make more sense if we were still in discussion and the motion on the table was withdrawn?
I can do that.
Can
Okay.
I ask the experts? No.
It's out of order though.
so, yeah, the motion was made. Again, the only reason I put it out there and with a motion and a second is for discussion, so we can control the discussion. But obviously, whatever the decision is, with regard to where do we want to land? We want to land on the 0 or 0.5. It's going to dictate what these next 3 motions are.
If this motion did not pass,
Mhm.
I would probably submit a second motion at 0.5363.
Oh my
And
gosh, you're trying to.
I'm the accountant.
Okay.
And I would humbly ask that we at least allocate the excess over what was presented here to the Board of Ed's operating.
That's a sub motion? I can. I
No,
could-
that was a suggestion. That's saying I might do that. I don't want to break protocol.
Okay,
Can I have some clarity on Mr. Anderson's
Yeah.
idea?
yes, please.
If you're looking to raise the mill 0.05, is that?
So the sheet as presented offered 0.5 and 1 full mil.
Yep.
If we were to do 0.5363, that would bring our mill to a nice even round number, but also substantially approximate the 0.5 column.
Okay.
Now we've got to come up with some amounts for the budgets. So you're.
So I'm gonna let the
Yes,
accountant give me those
So you got
numbers.
to do the math for the
I can
point,
do that.
the 6.3 on the Board of Ed's
All right.
budget.
So if we
So do I have a motion to table the motion, the discussion that's currently occurring with regard to the zero mill? Do I have a motion to table?
So moved.
So, ma'am.
Thank you. I have a motion and a second to table. All in favor of tabling?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
I,
Thank you. All right, so we're tabling the discussion with regard to the zero mill. Now, if the if the board is, and I didn't anticipate the, I'm going to have to do some more calculations here. If the plan is to go back into the agenda and do a roll call vote to adopt the 24-25 Board of Education operating budget, I need to know whomever is going to make that motion, how much is that?
Hmm.
And when the tax collector calls me up tomorrow morning, because we have another 4 decimal place,
Well, no,
budget.
because he's
Trying
going
to
to even
cure
it
that.
out.
We're
I know.
trying to
0.8.
cure that.
Or
Thank
three-
you.
Yeah, 38.
Page does it say where it's 1.8 something per mil? There it is. So 1 mil is 1. I always have like these movies in my head. Like my first thought was, a good thing we're not running some kind of evil empire. But then you made that comment. I'm like, no one expects the Spanish
Evil
Inquisition.
Empire. Thank you.
Monty Python.
Yeah.
All right, so if 1.875220 is equal to 1 mil, and I'm proposing 0. 316. It would be an addition of 68,000 and change,
To,
Board of Ed's operating. Wendy, double check me on this. So if
Right.
1 mil is 1.875, 220,000. And we multiply that by 0.0363.
What was that again? 0.0.
363. Am I doing this right?
Oh, wait a minute.
You gotta watch these decimals, they're important.
Yeah.
Hmm.
$68, you said?
$68,070.49.
That's just the additional
That's
363. That is not, the 0.5 is already in there.
0.5 as
Right,
presented,
this is the 0.363.
plus 68,000. Get us to a nice
I'm
round.
going to make a motion for the Board of Ed budget to be 80,498, $878 million,
which is equal
which
to,
is the
the result
1 mil, the
would be 1 mil.
1 mil increase.
Okay. So the motion on the floor is $80,498,878 for the Board of Education operating budget. Is there a second? Hearing none, that motion fails.
So if we take this, plus this, equals what I'm talking about. right?
You would assign all of that increase.
That was my suggestion.
Oh.
Don't do that.
631.
Okay.
6. 2.
Just want to make sure I'm looking at the right line.
That looks a little high.
higher than half a mil.
It should be 7.
Then the half mil, 79,564 to 79,6 something. Okay, all right, I hear you. All right,
Checked and double checked. I would submit a motion to set the Board of Education's operating budget at $79,632,601.49.
can you read that one more time, please? 79,600,000. Yeah.
632,
Yes.
601.49.
Okay. All right. So $79,632,601.49 is what is on the table. Is there a second? Motion fails. So I'll just go back to, I'll go back to what the scaffolded increases, level funded would be the 78,722, 698. A half mil is 79,564, 531. And the full mill motion failed. Thoughts?
The motion?
Yes.
The motion to accept the Board of Education operating budget at $78,722,688.
All right, I have a motion. 78,722,698. Do I have a second?
I will have to second that.
So motion made and seconded. Questions or comments? I'll call it. All in favor?
Aye.
Oh, it is roll call. I'm sorry. I'm starting with Miss Ianacito,
Yes.
Miss Pesky,
Nay.
Miss Traub,
Yes.
Mr. Anderson,
No.
Mr. Wright, and Mr. Bayes. Oh, we've
Is he
lost.
still there?
And we lost him.
Is he still there?
I don't see him. So, motion made and seconded. All Board of Finance members present voted. I had 3 in favor of the motion and 2 opposed. This motion carries. All right, so that is the Board of Education's budget, 78,722, 698. The second motion that I am looking for, it's actually third on the agenda, is a roll call vote to adopt the 2024-2025 Board of Education capital budget, which was presented at $1,552,000.
960.
Yeah, and based on the proposed mill rates, the recommendation was to zero that request out and refer this to the ARPA. I think the ARPA committee should be part of the discussion on this one.
Move that.
So the motion is made to zero the capital budget request. Do I have a second?
Second.
So the motion made by Board of Finance member Mr. Anderson, seconded by Mr. Wright. This is for a zero allocation for capital. Open to discussion. And I don't know if this is where you again want to talk about any surplus that can be transferred as well.
Right, like we mentioned before, I mean, it's too soon to know where they're going to end the fiscal year. So I'd fully expect any surpluses to be allocated to capital. that's a next month problem.
Okay. Other questions or comments?
Mayor, just a question. You put on one of the pages here that historically over the last 3 years, they have had surpluses. So there is a
Yes.
chance that.
Yes, they have. It happens, the, end of the year cycle where they'll have surpluses and, the Board of Ed looks through their budget, prioritizes where they can, capitalize on, spending those surpluses, for other high priority needs. So while in March, you might see a $1.6 million surplus, usually by June 30th, the surplus is much smaller, usually a few $100,000. But always I feel that it's a good message to send that you do have over $1 million in surpluses. Being able to use those against capital projects is probably a really good thing. All right, motion made, seconded. Any more discussion? I'm going to call this motion. And again, I'll start from my right. Ms. Inacito?
Yes.
Yes to zeroing out. Ms. Pesky?
Nay.
Ms. Traub?
Yes.
Mr. Anderson? And Mr. Wright?
Yes.
All right. That is 4-1. Item 4, I will entertain a motion to adopt the 2024-2025 city budget. If we're staying in line with the 0 mill rate increase, that amount would be $70,296,611. Do we have a motion? That amount covers 7296,611 would cover the debt service.
So it's a flat budget, just the debt service. Correct.
It would bring in $2.5 million against the 2.3 million for debt service.
So I will make that motion.
So motion made by Board of Finance Member Traub. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Inacito. So motion made and seconded to adopt the city budget at $70,296,611. Further discussion? Hearing none, I'll call the motion, starting from my right, Ms. Inacito. Sorry.
Yes.
Yeah. Ms. Pesky?
Nay.
Ms. Traub?
Yes.
Mr. Anderson?
No.
And Mr. Wright?
Yes.
So that's 3 in favor and 2 opposed. This motion carries. Then item 5. This is where I don't want to lose track of what's happened here.
Mhm.
So item 5, as a result of the approval of the Board of Education budget at $78,722,698 and the city budget at $70,296,611. Let me just double check, 72,96,611, 78,722. That would result in no mill rate increase. So the motion I would be looking for is to, I do think we should either round this up or down. Up makes sense, 47.97, if we have a motion. Do I have a motion to move it to 47.97?
I'll move for discussion.
Motion made by Board of Finance Member Anderson, 47.97 mill rate,
I'll second that.
and seconded by Ms. Traub. And the floor is open for discussion.
You want to put the pennies on?
Yeah. So the pennies are roughly about
Yeah.
$6,800.
Okay.
Do we ever build another dog park?
You know, and these are projections, you know, a lot of things happen, you know, assessment appeals, you know, that 6,800 can be 68,000. In last couple of years, 2022, it was $600,000 to the negative. So if we do adopt at 47.97, I don't know that we really have to worry about plugging $6,800 anywhere.
Just as a matter of protocols, my motion still on the table, are these the same motions?
So your motion that we tabled, I guess this would be it. You know, the roll call vote to set the mill rate.
Do I need to withdraw my motion?
Yeah, because his motion wasn't.
No,
voted.
she was-
Tabled, we could take it up. I know Mr. Anderson moved this for discussion purposes. If we're ready to take the vote and you want to take yours off the table? Yeah,
Yes, I don't care.
so your motion, so the motion that has been tabled was to adopt a budget that results in no mill rate increase. The no mill rate increase would be 47.9636. My only recommendation or request is that that be rounded up or down, so that the tax collector has, and the assessor's office has a slightly easier time for doing that.
Now I'm clear.
All right. So now I've lost track of that
So
motion.
does he have to amend his motion?
So,
It was- it was,
so Mr. Anderson's motion, you could withdraw your motion and we can just revisit the tabled motion.
I would like to withdraw my motion.
You want to withdraw your motion?
I'll read
So,
out a second.
okay. So Mr. Wright and Ms. Traub are withdrawing their motion to establish a budget with no mill rate increase. However, the motion made by Mr. Anderson, seconded by Ms. Traub, to set the mill rate at 47.97 is on the floor. Any other questions? And this is a roll call.
Yes.
So I'll call, starting to my right, Ms. Ianacito,
Yes.
Ms. Pesky,
Nay.
Ms. Traub,
Yes.
Mr. Anderson,
Yes.
and Mr. Wright.
Yes,
All right. Item 6, I'll entertain a motion again as a roll call vote to set the motor vehicle mill rate at 32.46. This is statutorily mandated. But to be consistent with our charter, we do need to take this motion. So do I have a motion to set that motor vehicle mill rate at 32.46?
Yes.
Mr. Anderson, and second by Mr. Wright. Questions or comments?
What are we gonna do? It is what it is.
It is what it is. I guess you could lower it.
Ask me next year.
I know. All right. All right, then I'm going to roll call this. Ms. Ianacito,
Yes.
Ms. Pesky,
Yes.
Ms. Trapp,
Yes.
Mr. Anderson,
Yes.
and Mr. Wright.
yes.
Okay. That does it. Carol, did I need the board to authorize me to execute a tax rate?
Somebody texted somebody else about that earlier. Yes.
So, the last motion is to vote to authorize, well, actually, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'll do it as a separate motion, to authorize the mayor to execute the tax warrants, to establish the mill rate at 47.97 for personal property and real estate, and the 32.46 for a motor vehicle. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson.
Second.
And second by Ms. Ianacito. And questions or comments? And again, this is just to authorize me to execute that tax warrant. Hearing no questions, this doesn't require a roll call. Oh, excuse me. No, it doesn't require a roll call to authorize me to execute the tax warrant, so I could just do a group. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. All right, that's it. There's no other business before this board this evening. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Moved.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson,
Second?
and second by Ms. Traub. All in favor?
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? We're adjourned.